What would you do if the man you loved vanished? Not walked away, not moved on, just disappeared. No warning, no explanations, no goodbye. 1 minute, he's slamming the door behind him with the finality of divorce, and the next, it's like he was never real to begin with. That was my life. For 6 months, I lived with questions that had no answers. Was he alive? Was he in trouble? Did he start over with someone else? Or, was I just another casualty in a life full of secrets? I remember the night it all changed. A Tuesday. I was folding laundry in the living room, half watching the evening news with a cup of lukewarm tea in my hand. My son had just gone to bed. The house was still, quiet, the kind of silence you get used to after a divorce, the kind that clings to the walls like dampness. I wasn't even listening at first, just letting the anchor's voice blur into background noise, until I heard his name. I remember the way my heart stopped. Not slowed, not skipped, stopped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands went numb, the teacup slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. But I couldn't look down, couldn't move, because there it was, his face, on the screen, Jason Whitmore, my ex-husband, the man who vanished from my life without a trace, the man who left me with no closure, no goodbye, just a signature on a divorce paper and a house full of silence. Now his face was flashing on every channel, under bold red letters that read, "Arrested, suspect in federal identity theft case." And in that moment, standing barefoot in a puddle of chamomile tea and broken porcelain, I realized something far worse than abandonment. I never really knew the man I married, not at all, and the world. It was about to find out exactly who Jason Whitmore really was. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when love seemed like something we both believed in, when the days weren't filled with anger, regret, and empty spaces. No, back then, it felt real, like it was meant to be. I still remember the first time Jason smiled at me across that coffee shop. He had this way of looking at me, like I was the only person in the room. We spoke for hours, laughing about nothing and everything. It was the kind of connection that made you feel like fate had finally found you, after all the wrong turns in life. We married 2 years later, on a warm autumn day in a little chapel just outside Denver. It was small, intimate, just a handful of friends and family. My parents beamed from the front row, my mother's eyes sparkling as she wiped away a tear. Jason's best friend stood beside him, smiling nervously, like he knew something I didn't. I never saw the signs back then. How could I? We were in love, weren't we? Or so I thought. Jason, my Jason, was everything I'd ever dreamed of: charming, intelligent, successful, a tech consultant, always busy, always in demand. And me? I was the nurse who worked long hours at the local hospital, patching up the broken, soothing the hurting. He told me I was his anchor, and I believed him. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood in suburban Colorado, a perfect place to start our lives. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. A 3-bedroom, red brick home with a white picket fence, surrounded by towering pines. The kind of house that made you believe in security. We'd come home from our weekend road trips, our little escapes from reality, and the place would always be waiting for us, warm and full of promise. The first year was perfect. Those early mornings when Jason would wake me up with a kiss on the forehead, whispering, "Good morning," before heading to work. The weekends filled with spontaneous road trips, getting lost on purpose, laughing at the map like it was some kind of adventure. Sometimes we'd just stay home, curled up on the couch in our pajamas, watching movies until the sun set. Our life was simple, but it was happy. I'd catch us in the reflection of windows sometimes, laughing together at some silly joke I didn't even remember. He'd smile at me, that perfect smile, and for those fleeting seconds, I felt invincible. No worries, no secrets, just two people, two souls who had found each other at the right time. But it was a false reality, wasn't it? A carefully constructed illusion that kept us both trapped. Because, you see, Jason wasn't the man I thought he was. And I was blind to it. But things changed. At first, it was small. A missed dinner here, a late meeting there. Little things that seemed harmless. Jason would come home late from work, saying he'd been caught up with a project. I didn't question it. I trusted him. Maybe I should've. I noticed the shift when he started leaving his phone face down at the dinner table. At first, I thought it was nothing. Who didn't like a little privacy, right? But then I saw the way he'd react if I even glanced at it. He'd stiffen. His voice would grow cold, his eyes would flash with something I couldn't place. And the excuses, they were too familiar, too rehearsed. The second time it happened, I should have asked more questions. But I didn't. I didn't want to face the truth. Because deep down, I knew it was already slipping away from me. I knew something was wrong. But love makes you blind. It wraps you in a fantasy you never want to wake up from. So I didn't ask. Jason wasn't just working late anymore. He was with someone, and I couldn't bear to admit it. Not yet. I should have fought harder. I should have noticed sooner. But I didn't. And by the time I did, everything had already been broken. I remember that night like it was yesterday. I was sitting in the living room, reading a book, trying to keep the quiet from swallowing me whole. Jason had been busy again, another late-night work project, he said. The house felt too big for just me in it. I hadn't heard from him in hours. I hadn't even seen him all evening. And then, there it was. A small detail. A detail that felt insignificant at first, but now it's all I can think about. The phone rang. Jason's phone. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, untouched for hours. He always kept it on vibrate. I couldn't resist. I knew I shouldn't, but I did. I picked it up. It was her. A message from Alicia, the name I'd never heard before. Can't wait to see you tonight. I remember my hands shaking, my heart racing in my chest. I wanted to throw the phone, scream, run far away. But instead, I did nothing. I put the phone back down on the counter and sat there, in silence, listening to the sound of my heartbeat thumping against my ribs. That was the moment I knew for sure. Jason wasn't the man I married anymore. He was someone else entirely. I should have done something that night, but I didn't. I didn't want to believe what was staring me right in the face. It wasn't just the phone, no, it was everything leading up to it. All the small things that I had ignored, convincing myself that they were nothing more than the pressures of life. Jason's long hours at work. His moods, which seemed to swing like a pendulum from affectionate to distant. The sudden need for space. He said he needed time to himself, and I believed him. I thought he was under stress, that he was going through something. But now, looking back, I realize it was never stress. It was a lie. A series of lies, woven together like a web I couldn't see. Jason had already checked out. He wasn't just working late, he was building a life that didn't include me. And I was the last to know. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was her. Alicia. The woman I never even knew existed. It was like I was living in a house of mirrors. The reflection I saw every day wasn't the reality. It was a distorted image, one I was too afraid to see clearly. But I couldn't hide from the truth forever. And soon enough, the cracks started to show. Jason wasn't just distant. He was cold. He'd walk into the house, walk right past me, like I wasn't even there. There were nights when I'd try to talk to him, just casual conversation about our day, and he'd barely respond. His eyes were somewhere else. I remember one evening, asking him how work was going. He muttered something about a new project, something about a big deal, but his voice had no warmth. It was mechanical, like he wasn't even there with me. At first, I told myself it was just stress. It had to be, right? Work was demanding. I wasn't about to start doubting him. But the reality is, he stopped seeing me. He stopped hearing me. And I started to feel like I was invisible in my own home. Then came the final straw. It wasn't just the phone either. It was the whispers. The other woman in the office, Alicia, I later learned her name was. I started hearing about her in passing. Casual comments that didn't seem like much at first. A coworker mentioned how Jason and Alicia were spending a lot of time together on a project. Another time, someone joked about how Alicia was always at his side, making sure he didn't need anything. At the time, I laughed it off. I didn't want to believe it. But the nagging feeling, it wouldn't go away. I kept asking myself, what was happening to my marriage? What was happening to him? To us? It wasn't just the late hours at work. It wasn't just the texts, the strange phone calls, the looks he'd give when I asked him a simple question. It was the fact that, little by little, Jason had changed. And not for the better. A few weeks later, I found the note. I wish I could say that I confronted him right away, but I didn't. I waited, and waited, because, for the first time, I realized I was afraid. Afraid of what I might hear. Afraid of the answers that might shatter what was left of the woman I once was. And the worst part? I still wanted him. Even then, I didn't want to let go. I still loved him, loved the man I thought I knew. But the next day, when I found him, standing there, his back to me, his phone in his hand, typing away like it was a normal day, I knew, I couldn't ignore it anymore. He wasn't just seeing someone else. He was planning a life with her. It was in that moment, the moment I knew for sure, that I confronted him. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but I had to say them. I had to ask. The silence between us had become unbearable, and I needed something, anything, to break it. Are you seeing someone else? I asked. Jason didn't look up. He didn't even flinch. For a second, I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. But then, in that calm, cold voice of his, he said, I think you already know the answer to that. And just like that, just like the flipping of a switch, something inside me snapped. I felt rage, betrayal, humiliation, all of it crashing through me at once. I don't remember the exact words we exchanged after that, but I do remember his face, the look in his eyes as he admitted everything, like it was the most normal thing in the world. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just a fling. It was something more, something deeper. It was a betrayal that went far beyond my imagination. In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about another woman. It wasn't about some misplaced affection or a midlife crisis. It was about everything we had built together, the house, the dreams, the promises. Jason had been living in a world that didn't include me. That was the hardest truth of all. It was never about Alicia. It was about him. It was about me. But no matter how much I tried to reach But no matter how much I tried to reach for him, no matter how many nights I cried in the dark, begging for him to come back to me, he never did. He chose her. He chose the lies. And I was left standing in the rubble, with nothing but a shattered version of the man I thought I knew. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, he disappeared. Not just from the house, he disappeared from my life completely. His phone was disconnected. His car gone. No more texts. No more calls. He was a ghost. A memory. And I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I thought I knew, struggling to understand how the man I loved could just vanish, leaving nothing but a trail of lies and an aching emptiness in his wake. I found the phone on a Tuesday. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I had borrowed Jason's car to run errands, his was in the shop, and I needed to pick up groceries. I didn't expect to find anything that would change my life, let alone destroy the fragile wall I had built between my suspicions and the truth. But there it was. A small, black burner phone, wedged between the seat and the center console. Not an old phone, no, this one looked brand new. The kind of phone you buy when you don't want anyone to trace your calls. The kind of phone you keep hidden for a reason. I froze for a second. My heart started pounding in my chest as I stared at the phone. Why would Jason have this? I didn't touch it. I didn't want to invade his privacy, but my gut was telling me something I couldn't ignore. Something sharp and dangerous. I looked around, making sure no one was watching, before I slid the phone from its hiding spot. I turned it on. The screen blinked to life. And there it was. Do you miss me? Can't wait to see you again tonight. The message was from someone named Alicia, the same name I'd seen on that note. The same name that had been haunting me for weeks. But this time, there was something else. I'll be waiting in room 215. My hands shook as I read the message again and again. The world around me blurred, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. Room 215. Tonight? I couldn't breathe. I should have gone straight to him. I should have picked up that phone and confronted him. But instead, I did what I always did. I bottled it up. I didn't want to face what I knew was coming. But the very next day, the universe decided it had had enough of my silence. I ran into Marie, our next-door neighbor. She was a sweet woman, older than me by about 10 years, but we always had pleasant chats when we bumped into each other. That day, though, she looked at me a little differently. Her eyes shifted away as if she was trying to choose her words carefully. And then she said it. I saw Jason last night. He was with a woman, someone young, at the hotel on Oak Street. I couldn't have heard her correctly. I could feel the blood rushing to my ears, the noise of my heartbeat drowning out everything else. Are you sure? I asked, my voice trembling. Yes, she replied, her face tight with concern. I saw them leaving the parking lot together, around 8 p.m. I thought it was odd, so I remembered the time. I didn't need to hear anything else. My mind was already racing ahead, putting the pieces together, connecting dots I didn't want to see. The late-night meetings, the burner phone, the texts, the woman, it all added up. Jason wasn't just having an affair. No, this wasn't just a fling. He was in love with her. And that's when the truth hit me, harder than anything I could have imagined. That night, I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront him. I had to hear it from his mouth. I couldn't live in this dark, suffocating silence anymore. I waited until Jason got home, and then, in the middle of the kitchen, with the lights dimmed and the house smelling of burnt toast, I asked him, "Are you seeing someone else?" It wasn't angry at first. It wasn't accusatory. It was just a simple question. A question that needed to be answered. But Jason didn't even flinch. He just stared at me, a coldness in his eyes that made my blood run cold. And then, with the calmest voice, he said, "You're imagining things again. There's no one else." It was like a slap in the face. How dare he tell me I was imagining things when the evidence was right there in front of him? The burner phone, the texts, the hotel parking lot, the lies. I felt like my entire body was on fire. "Stop lying to me," I said, my voice trembling now. "I know about Alicia. I know about the hotel, and I know you're in love with her." Jason didn't respond right away. He looked away, and for a second, I thought maybe he was going to admit everything. But then he turned back to me, his expression hardening, and he said, "Yes, I'm in love with her. I've been in love with her for months." And just like that, the man I thought I knew, the man I had loved with all my heart, was gone, replaced by a stranger. Jason wasn't. He was someone else entirely. And now, I had to face the truth. He was never mine to keep. The first week after Jason left was a blur. I was numb, stumbling through the motions of everyday life like a zombie. But then the reality hit, and it hit hard. Jason had disappeared, vanished without a trace, not just from the house, but from my life entirely. He didn't show up for court-ordered meetings about the divorce. His phone number disconnected. His email inaccessible. No forwarding address. No sign of him anywhere. At first, I thought he was just running from the mess he'd made. I thought maybe he'd be back, maybe to settle things, maybe even to confront me one last time. But the days turned into weeks. And still, nothing. It wasn't just that he disappeared. It was that it felt like he had never existed. His absence was more suffocating than his presence ever was. I tried to move on. I filed the papers, got the house ready for sale. But deep down, I kept wondering, where was Jason? Why was he hiding? What was he running from? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. This wasn't just a man leaving his wife. This wasn't just a messy divorce. This was something else entirely. That's when it happened. One evening, while I was making dinner and trying to ignore the gnawing sense of dread that kept creeping up my spine, I turned on the TV. It was just background noise at first. Until I heard the words, "Breaking news. Local man arrested in connection to massive fraud and identity theft ring." I froze. I felt my heart lurch, my breath caught in my throat. The room around me seemed to stretch out, the air too thick to breathe. The anchor continued talking, but I couldn't hear anything else. I couldn't look away from the screen. There, in front of me, was Jason's face. His mugshot, blurry and distorted by the flashing lights of a police camera, stared back at me with cold indifference. A man I once loved. A man I thought I knew. The news anchor went on to explain that Jason had been part of a complex network of fraudsters involved in identity theft and large-scale financial crimes. They had stolen millions, laundering money through a variety of means, and Jason was allegedly one of the ringleaders. They showed a flash of an FBI raid, a blur of agents in black suits breaking down doors, confiscating computers, documents, and more. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It felt like I was suffocating. This was the man I had been married to. This was the person I had spent my life with. And now, he was a criminal, a fugitive. And I had no idea. I couldn't understand it. How could Jason, the man I married, the man who swore to me that I was the most important thing in his life, be involved in something so dark? So dangerous? How could he hide it from me for so long? His sister, Lauren, the one person I thought I could trust, called me the next day. I had barely spoken to her since the divorce, but now, she was frantic. "Hannah, Jason's gone," she said, her voice cracking. "He's been missing for weeks. The police found a hotel room with his things, but they can't find him. He's gone off the grid, and they're treating it like a case of disappearance. I thought he was just hiding from you. I didn't know. I didn't know he was involved in something like this. That's when I realized, I wasn't the only one who didn't know Jason. His own sister had been kept in the dark. And now, he had disappeared from everyone's life, vanished like smoke into the night. But as the days passed, the news kept coming in. More raids, more arrests. Jason's name kept surfacing. The truth I had been afraid to face was now right in front of me. Jason hadn't just abandoned me, he had been living a double life. A life full of lies, manipulation, and deceit. He was involved in things far worse than I could have imagined. He wasn't just my ex-husband. He was a criminal, a fugitive, and a master of deception. The next few days were a whirlwind. The police came and went. They took my statement, asking about Jason's whereabouts, about our life together, about anything that might help them track him down. I told them everything, how he had become distant, how he'd pulled away from me, how I had no idea about the dark life he was leading. But none of that mattered now. What hurt the most was that this man who I once loved, had taken everything from me. My trust, my sense of safety, my belief in everything we had built together. I wasn't just a victim of a divorce. I was a victim of a fraud so elaborate, so meticulously planned, that I was left standing at the wreckage with nothing but questions. Why hadn't I seen it? Why hadn't I known? How could I have loved someone who was capable of such darkness? As time went on, Jason's disappearance became a national story. His name appeared in more news outlets, alongside criminals and other fraudsters who had been caught in the ring. And every time I saw it, every time his name flashed on the screen, it was like a fresh wound being opened in my heart. Jason had been the love of my life. And now, he was a name on a police blotter. The man who had once held my heart was now a stranger to me, someone I didn't even recognize. And yet, somehow, he was still haunting me, haunting all of us. Jason's story ended with no closure, no goodbye, no, I'm sorry, just a fugitive's life unraveling in the public eye, a string of stolen identities, and a trail of lies so thick it suffocated anyone who got too close. And as for me, I was left with nothing but the shards of my broken heart, and the haunting question, who was he really? The hardest part wasn't the silence. It wasn't the empty house or the missing person report. It wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the shame, the overwhelming, suffocating shame that I felt every time I walked into a store, every time I answered the phone. The shame of being that woman, the one who was so blind, so stupid, that she couldn't see the man she loved for who he really was. The woman who was left behind, abandoned by someone she had trusted with her heart. But it wasn't just shame. It was debt, and fear, and the haunting realization that my life, everything I thought was secure, had been taken from me. Jason hadn't just left me with broken promises and a shattered heart. He had stolen from me. When the credit report came in, I barely registered the words. But the shock hit me like a punch to the gut when I saw the numbers. Jason had used my name, my social security number, my identity. He'd racked up debt in my name, loans, credit cards, purchases I'd never made. It was like he had erased me, replacing me with someone I didn't recognize, someone he could manipulate. I was left with a ruined credit score, bills I couldn't pay, and a future that seemed far too dark to face. My hands trembled as I looked at the report. How could he have done this to me? How could someone I had loved be capable of such destruction? The betrayal went far deeper than I could have imagined. But somehow, I kept going. It wasn't easy. It wasn't pretty. There were days when I felt like I couldn't breathe, when the weight of it all threatened to swallow me whole. But I didn't want to be a victim. I couldn't let Jason win. I had to rebuild, piece by piece. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Daniels, who helped me understand the trauma I had endured. She listened, patiently, as I recounted every lie, every betrayal, every moment I had allowed myself to believe in Jason's version of reality. She helped me see that it wasn't my fault, that I hadn't caused this, that I was worthy of a life free from shame and fear. I also joined a local support group for women going through divorce. At first, I didn't want to go. I felt like an outsider. But when I walked into that room full of women who had all experienced the same betrayal, something changed. The shame started to lift. Slowly, I began to understand that I wasn't alone. There were women just like me, women who had been through the same heartbreak, the same crushing weight of betrayal. We shared our stories, we cried, and we supported each other. And little by little, I began to rebuild my life, one small piece at a time. But the hardest part wasn't just fixing what Jason had destroyed. It was finding myself again. I had been so lost in the role of being Jason's wife, of being part of his world, that I forgot who I was. I didn't know who I was anymore. I had to rediscover the woman I used to be before all of this. The woman who was strong. The woman who was capable of more than she ever thought. I went back to school. I'd always wanted to specialize in trauma nursing, but Jason had convinced me it wasn't practical. Well, he wasn't around to stop me anymore. I enrolled in night classes and studied harder than I'd ever studied before. I had a fire in me now. A fire to prove to myself that I could survive this. I also started working out. At first, it was just to get my mind off things, to feel something other than the weight of the past. But it became more. It became a release, a way to rebuild my body, my strength, my confidence. Slowly, the person I saw in the mirror started to look more like the person I wanted to be. I was no longer just the woman Jason left behind. I was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who would never let anyone, or anything, define her again. It didn't happen overnight. It took time, a lot of time. The healing process was messy, painful, and filled with setbacks. There were days when I wanted to give up. There were days when I thought I would never feel whole again. But then, one day, I looked in the mirror and saw something different. The woman who looked back at me wasn't just a victim anymore. She wasn't the woman Jason had left behind. No, she was stronger than that. She was more than that. And I was proud of her. I didn't need Jason to define me. I didn't need him to give me worth. I had found my own. And that was something he could never take from me. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't undo the pain or the betrayal. But I could change my future. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited for it. The woman I was before Jason, the woman who had dreams and strength, hadn't been erased. She had only been buried for a while. But now, she was back, stronger than ever. I didn't need Jason. I didn't need anyone who didn't see my worth. I had my own worth. And I was ready to live a life that was mine. Trial was something I never expected. I had been to court before, divorce court, custody hearings. But this? This was something entirely different. Jason wasn't just the man who'd broken my heart. He wasn't just the man who'd stolen my identity. He was now a criminal. A man who had caused untold damage, not only to me but to countless others. When the trial started, I had no idea how I would feel. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face him again. The man who had once held my hand through everything was now sitting on the other side of the courtroom, in handcuffs, wearing an orange jumpsuit. His face was a mask of indifference. A cold, emotionless shell. The prosecutor outlined the charges. Fraud, identity theft, money laundering. They painted a picture of Jason as the mastermind behind a ring of criminals who had defrauded people just like me. I felt numb, but I knew what I had to do. I had to testify. I had to speak the truth. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about trying to hurt him the way he'd hurt me. No, this was about closure. Jason might have stolen my peace for a time, but he could never steal my strength. As they escorted Jason out of the courtroom in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of relief, a sense of closure. I knew the road to healing wasn't over, it was just beginning. But this? This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when his power over me was finally over. I walked out of the courtroom alone, but not broken. My shoulders weren't hunched with shame anymore. My heart wasn't heavy with regret. I was free. Jason's name will be remembered for what he did, for the lies he told, for the people he hurt, for the way he tried to destroy everything I believed in. But my name? My name will be remembered for something else, for the strength I found when I thought I had none left, for the courage I summoned when I was sure I couldn't go on. I wasn't just his victim anymore. I was survivor. I was a woman who had faced the worst of betrayal and emerged stronger. I had found my peace. And now, for the first time in a long time, I was ready to live. Sometimes, life breaks you. It breaks you so completely that you think there's no way to come back. You feel like a part of you is lost, a part of you is gone forever. You think you'll never be the same. But what I've learned is this: life doesn't break you to destroy you. It breaks you to rebuild you stronger. It's in the pain, in the betrayal, in the darkness, that you discover who you truly are. You discover your strength. When Jason left, I felt shattered. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Every moment of my life had revolved around him, his needs, his desires, his lies. I thought I was nothing without him. But now, I see the truth. I was never nothing. I was always something, more than I ever realized. I see now that I ignored the red flags. I ignored the warning signs that were there all along. The late nights, the secrecy, the coldness. I told myself he was just busy, that he was going through a rough patch. But deep down, I knew. My intuition was screaming at me, telling me that something wasn't right. I should have listened. I should have trusted myself. But even when I didn't listen, life had a way of showing me the truth, painfully, but clearly. And in that truth, I found my power. I found my worth. I realized that I didn't need anyone else to tell me who I was. I didn't need Jason. I didn't need anyone who couldn't see my value. I was enough. I always had been. I spent so much time trying to be everything for someone who never saw my worth. I gave so much of myself to a man who could never love me the way I deserved. But now, I realize, I was never meant to be anyone's second choice. I wasn't meant to be anyone's fallback plan. I was meant to be myself, whole, strong, and unbroken. I don't need Jason's apology. I don't need his approval. I've learned to forgive myself for trusting him, for believing in a dream that wasn't real. And when I finally let go of that dream, that's when I started to live again. The day I signed the divorce papers, I thought it was the end of everything. But now, I see it for what it truly was, the beginning of something new. A new chapter, a new me. I don't need to seek revenge. I don't need to get even. What I needed all along, was to find my peace, to rebuild my life, to learn to trust myself again. And as I do, I realize something. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. For the first time in a long time, I'm finally living. So, to anyone out there who feels like they've been broken by someone else, whether by betrayal, lies, or heartbreak, let me tell you something. You are not defined by what happened to you. You are defined by how you rise, how you pick up the pieces of your life and build something even stronger than what came before. You are not broken. You are stronger than you ever imagined. And you are worthy of a life filled with love, real love. Love for yourself, love from those who see you for who you truly are. And that's a love that no one, can ever take away. The day I took my life back was the day I realized I had always been in control. It was never about the man who left. It was always about me, finding my way back to the woman I was meant to be. Sometimes, life has a way of breaking you. It shatters everything you thought you knew, everything you believed was secure. It tears down the walls you've spent years building, and you're left standing there, naked in your vulnerability, not knowing who you are anymore. For months, I felt broken, not just from the divorce, but from everything that came with it. The lies, the betrayal, the way Jason had torn apart my life, my heart, without a second thought. It was like I was living someone else's life, a life that had been planned for me, but not by me. He'd made the choices for both of us, and I'd been too blinded by love to see it. I didn't just lose Jason in that divorce. I lost myself. The woman who I thought I was, the one who trusted, who loved, who believed in a future, was gone. All that was left was a shell. A woman who had no idea where to go, no idea who to trust, and worst of all, no idea how to rebuild. But you know what I've learned? Sometimes, life breaks you so it can rebuild you stronger. The pain is inevitable, but it is also the seed of something new, something better, something stronger. When Jason walked out of that courtroom, his chains were heavier than any punishment the law could hand him. His guilt, his regrets, the weight of his lies, they were the real sentence. And I realized something. The real punishment wasn't in the prison he'd be locked away in. It was in the fact that he would never know peace. That he would never be able to feel the healing I had found. And that, in itself, was my victory. I wasn't the same woman anymore. I wasn't the woman I had been when Jason first walked into my life, full of promise and hope. No, I had transformed. In those months of despair, I learned what true strength meant. I learned what it meant to trust myself, to trust my instincts, to rebuild my life from the ground up, piece by piece. But it wasn't easy. It never is. The hardest part wasn't letting Jason go. No, that part came slowly. I had to let go of the idea of who he was, the man I thought I knew. The hardest part was letting go of myself, the person I had been before he came into my life, the person I had forgotten, lost under the weight of his expectations and my own need to please him. It's strange, you know. I had spent so much of my life trying to find myself in someone else, through Jason's love, through our shared dreams. But what I've come to understand is that true strength doesn't come from someone else's approval. It doesn't come from the love of a man, no matter how much you think you need it. True strength comes from within, from you. For so long, I blamed myself for not seeing the red flags. I blamed myself for not noticing the small cracks in the foundation of our marriage. But in therapy, I learned that blame isn't healing. The healing comes from forgiveness. And that forgiveness wasn't for Jason, it was for me. I had to forgive myself for giving away pieces of myself that I couldn't get back. I had to forgive myself for allowing his lies to become my reality. And, most importantly, I had to forgive myself for not trusting my own instincts when I knew something wasn't right. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean you erase the pain. It means you stop letting the past control your future. You stop allowing the darkness to take over. You choose to step into the light, even if the first steps are shaky and uncertain. And I learned that I am so much more than what Jason left behind. So much more than the woman he betrayed. I didn't need Jason to define me. I didn't need him to validate my worth. For so long, I had thought I was nothing without him, but now, I know the truth. I am everything I need. I am capable. I am strong. And I am worthy of a love that isn't born from lies. I'm worthy of a love that comes from truth, truth in myself, truth in the life I'm building, and truth in the people who surround me now. Sometimes, we think we need someone else to complete us, to make us whole. But the truth is, we're already whole. We were always whole. We just have to remember it. The day I took my life back wasn't the day Jason walked out of that courtroom. It was the day I stopped asking for his validation, the day I stopped waiting for his apology. It was the day I realized that I'm not defined by the man who left me. I am defined by the woman who stood up and said, I'm still here. I'm not who I was before. I'm not the woman who let herself be defined by someone else's choices. I'm not the woman who held on to a dream that was never meant to be. I am the woman who learned to stand alone, to trust herself, and to rebuild her life on her own terms. And now, I'm ready to live. The day I took my life back was the day I chose myself.